Thank you so much for tuning in back to the WillPower podcast. My name is William Gomez, and I'm the host of the show. Today, we're in for a huge treat. We have Sean Larkin, also known as Sticks. You've probably seen him on the show Live PD as one of the hosts there. He's also was a cop here in the Tulsa area for 25 years. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. He shares his journey through being a cop and then also being a dad with his personal life. And man, this conversation is, I was just telling Nettie, who helps me with the podcast, that it was such a different conversation, but I truly enjoyed it, and I can't wait for you to listen to it. Sean Larkin, man, thank you so much for joining me today in the WillPower podcast, man. It's been a while since I've seen you. How have you been?
I've been good, man. Just grinding along, kind of like everybody else in this world, but yeah, keeping busy.
Yeah, and so I feel like your face is going to be pretty familiar for anybody that jumps in and listens to the podcast, but for anybody that hasn't heard your name or seen your face before, give me a 1-minute introduction.
My name's Sean Larkin. A lot of people know me as Sticks, which is my nickname. I was a police officer here in Tulsa for just under 25 years, retired about almost 2 years ago now. Pure fluke deal, right place, right time. Ended up, on a television show called Live PD, which became a huge hit. That went off the air during the George Floyd protests, and still was lucky to stay involved in some other media stuff. Wrote a book. Started my own podcast at the time called Cocktails and Cocktails, became a regular contributor to multiple news agencies across the country. And now we're back on air again with a show called On Patrol Live that airs every Friday and Saturday night. So not a native of Tulsa, but I've been here long enough that I definitely claim it as home. Yeah, man. You were a cop here in Tulsa for like 20 years? Is that just almost 25. I started January of 1997 and retired in May of 2021. Man, that's crazy. I think that you and I met right around the time where you were retiring there. Yep.
So when did you start going to CrossFit Eclipse?
I transferred over there like in the fall of 2018 or so.
Okay, so
kind of around that
maybe
time.
It was a little bit before.
Yeah, I think you were like a 5:30 a.m. guy, and I'm a little bit later in the day, so I didn't cross paths with you unless it was on a Saturday or something. Yeah, and what's crazy is that we were just talking about my little injury that I had, and I did not know that you had been doing CrossFit for so long. Yeah, man, it was kind of, I was on there on the police department, and it was November of 2006, and at the time I was on the SWAT team. I was doing like a little bit of boxing, and kind of came across kettlebell workouts back at the time, which were new, because usually it was the old chest and tries on Monday. I'd run 3 miles on Tuesday, back and buys on Wednesday, run 3 miles on Thursday, that type of deal. And one of the guys that was on the SWAT team with this guy by the name of Brandon Wyckoff, he ended up coming across, CrossFit.com. And that used to be what everybody followed back in the day for the workouts and all that stuff. And so we started doing it, and just got hooked in it. And I think I was 33 years old at the time. And I wish that had been around when I was 20, 21, 22. But once I got into it, it's the only thing I've done since. So it stuck with me. So, I had to move to CrossFit Jinx because we moved, and it was just, too far out. So I got really lucky that now I go to CrossFit Jinx, and the coach there, Breck Berry. Oh, yeah. So he started super early too. And I think he's probably only like maybe 4 or 5 years younger than you, and he went all in, man, and was at the first CrossFit Games. I think he's been 7 times. Yeah, I think Breck is actually a year younger than me, and the reason I know that, we've kind of been, when you do the CrossFit Open, I've always seen his name in there. And
gotcha.
He's such a phenomenal athlete. The guy was on the cover of like Oklahoma Runners magazine at one point because he can run as well. And so I was always happy when I bumped up to the next age bracket. I knew Breck wasn't around. There was another guy around here named like Sean Malloy. There was a couple of guys that were in that masters category were real good. But I met Breck back in that era, maybe not 2006, probably 2008 or something like that, when he would post always on CrossFit.com. And that's how it used to be. The workout was there, and everybody across the country did the same workout, and you posted in the comments what your time was, and it put your location. And he put like Jinx, Oklahoma or something like that, and just ended up connecting through there. And then there was another guy by the name of Eric Barber that had a gym here. I mean, it's just, kind of the history of how CrossFit in Tulsa kind of built up to what it is. It makes sense of why he has his
that was why he has his website that way he does, because he likes to do things pretty old school, like, you know, and that was one of my biggest complaints, that, you know, at Clips we had Sugar Wad, and I was just like, man, like I want to be able to make it easier, and you'd have to go to the website, see the workout, and I'm just like, but now I'm used to it, you know, you kind of get used to it. So I remember, like, I think it was shortly after we met, we were at this somebody's like 4th of July swim party or something, and you were telling me a little bit about, because I was asking you, like, how did you get into that? And the way that you described it just now, just said to being a host of Live PD and stuff, you said just kind of being at the right place, right time. But you had also told me and refreshed my mind that you had kind of like been in a show like a few years back or so. Like, how did you get into that?
Yeah, so a few years prior to that, here in Tulsa, from 2008 up until I retired, I was the supervisor of our gang unit. And just one of these law enforcement emails that had come across that was passed on to me from my supervisor. There was a production company at the time that was really small out of New Jersey, and they were wanting to do a new television show featuring gang units across the country. And they wanted to show like a large department, you know, which would be something like LA or Houston, Chicago, a medium-sized department, which Tulsa would fit into, and then like a smaller, you know, rural agency, how they were dealing with it. So I responded back to the email. I knew nothing about the TV world or entertainment world at all. And the way it works is they do what's called a sizzle. And it's basically they have enough money together that they can basically produce a show almost like a pilot. And then they get that done, and then they show it to various networks, and the network goes, hey, we like this show, we'll buy 6 episodes. And then, you know, 3 or 4 episodes in, the network can look at ratings, you know, whether they like the content and things like that. And then they go, okay, hey, we want to renew. We want to order 20 more shows. We want to order. And that's just kind of how it goes. So they came out, they were going to do a show called Jump Out Boys. And they put together, in my opinion, what I thought was a killer, you know, sizzle that they try to sell to the networks. But all the other networks out there said, man, this is just like the show Cops, which was already on TV. It was nothing original to it. So it didn't go anywhere, but I kept in touch with the production company just because we hit it off well when they had come here to Tulsa to film. And fast forward a few years later, 2016, they reached back out and they're like, hey, man, we're going to try to do this live police show. And they asked us if we wanted to be a part of it. Our department got on board. The crew rode with me in Tulsa when the show started, and that just kind of spiraled and grew from there.
So how did that really change your life, and how did you kind of cope with that? Because I mean, you kind of blew up whenever the show kind of started, and it's crazy because the show Cops, it's somewhat similar besides the fact that it's live, but I mean, Cops has, I think it's like the longest.
Oh, it's been around forever.
Yeah, since like either the 70s or the 80s to where, but Live PD is just, it just has enough twist to where it just makes it look so much more modern and so much more like attractive per se. So I think that kind of just made it take off. And I know it was you and another guy. There was 3 hosts, right? There's 3 hosts?
Yeah, there's 3. So like I said, the show now is called On Patrol Live. Dan Abrams is the main host. I'm a co-host, analyst, and we have a guy on there by the name of Curtis Wilson, who is out of Richland County, South Carolina. But, you know, the difference, I think, from this show or that type of show compared to Cops is a 30-minute episode that's pre-recorded, edited, and it's designed to show, you know, it shows action. I mean, you've basically got 3 probably 7-minute clips that are showing action, you know, and then you've got commercials, and there's your 30 minutes. Whereas On Patrol Live, or, you know, a show like previously Live PD, it's a 3-hour, truly live, unedited show. And it just, the idea behind that is just to say, this is policing in America. And that's why we show urban areas, we show rural areas, we try to show highway patrols, we try to show sheriff's departments, police departments, and you get to kind of see the difference of what the job is or what people are dealing with across the country. And one of the things I loved about being a police officer for as long as I was, and it's so cliche sounding, but I mean, every single day, every single call is different. You just don't know, you know, what you're going to do. It's not like you're sitting in a cubicle crunching numbers all day as an accountant or anything like that. And so that's what people get to see on this show. They get to see, you know, we might have a Friday night where it's just 3 hours of nonstop crazy action happening. And then Saturday night, you've got the exact same departments on, some of the exact same officers, and it's just nothing's happening. And that's the idea behind the show. So I think it really keeps people involved in it because people just have a general interest in the law enforcement genre to begin with, and then it's that unknown of what's going to happen.
Yeah, and like you said, the unknown, and I think that's what kind of hooks people in. You have to be able to hook people in television, and especially now even social media. So how do you think that it changed your life personally and even at work? 'Cause at the time you were still working, and how did you like adapt to it, and how'd you cope with it?
One of the things I think was, I guess, beneficial. I was a few years older already. I'd been married at the time, had kids, been through a lot on the police department, and so I didn't even have social media when the show started. I had, to this day, still to this day, William, I've never been on Facebook. I've never had Facebook ever.
That's crazy.
The network A&E, which is who Live PD was with, they created my Twitter account for me because it was part of the show, and social media is a big part of that show or On Patrol Live. And Instagram, I had just started, honestly, maybe a year earlier than that, but I started because my daughter was going to college. And that was like, no, I could at least see what the heck she's doing. That was, and she made the account for me.
That's hilarious.
And so, to see once Instagram and Twitter and all that started blowing up, the way I try to explain it is when you become a rookie police officer. I was 23 years old when I became a cop. So, just like the three of us sitting in here right now, if a cop walks in a uniform, you're going to turn and pay attention to him like, oh, there's a cop here. Or if you're in a restaurant, a cop comes in, there's a cop here. If you're at an intersection at a red light and a police car pulls up next to you, you're aware there's a police car next to you. You're not aware of the blue Toyota Camry sitting next to you. You pay attention to the police car. So when you're a young kid as a police officer, it takes a while to get used to everybody pays attention to you. Everybody's always looking at you. Everybody is aware of you. And so when this show, blew up, Live PD had over 2 million viewers every Friday and Saturday night. And so, traveling, whether I was on vacation, traveling to New York every week, because that's where the show is at, people stopping you in the airport, it just takes, you're like, okay, man, people now pay attention or recognize me when I'm in plain clothes as opposed to just in my uniform. And not to pat myself on my back, I guess, but as all this was going on, I was still working full time as a cop here during the week. I'd get off, fly to New York every weekend for the show. Come Monday, when I was back with my squad, we didn't talk about the show. We didn't talk about anything like that. I was still Sticks or, Sergeant Larkin, whatever, to everybody. I was like, all right, guys, whose door are we kicking in today? All right, 2:00 in the morning. I'm like, man, there's a shooting tonight, guys. We got to come in and work this shooting. It was just business as usual at work. And then it was like living two different lives. I'm sorry I'm rambling on, but it was like full-time single dad at the time, cop in Tulsa, and then on the weekend, I was by myself in New York City doing television. It was just two different worlds.
So, I can see how that really prepared you to where, of course, now you probably, like you said, you walk into the airport and people kind of maybe turn around and stuff to where you're probably used to that a little bit more as you started, out. It's funny. One of the guys that I consider him a good friend when I moved to CrossFit Jinx. I don't know if you know him. His name is Chris Butterfield.
Oh yeah, Butter's stud, man.
Yeah. And so it's funny.
Phenomenal cop, by the way. I will tell you that. That dude is a hell of a policeman.
Dude,
he's a good cop.
What's crazy is that I have I'm so curious on just anybody that comes on the show, and I'm just kind of wanting to know a little bit about kind of what they do. Last week, we had a guy that started a company for scrubs for athletes, like so that way they weren't too baggy and stuff. And I'm just like, that's just so fascinating to me because I didn't even know that was a thing. And so with Butter, he has the dog situation, which is completely different than any other cop. And so he's showed me pictures and everything, and I'm just like so fascinated by that. So even like you said it yourself, you were kind of living two completely different lives, even though they were kind of around the same stuff. But which one did you feel that you enjoyed more?
Man, I loved being a policeman. Absolutely. And there are parts about it I still miss to this day. I did it for a long time, almost 25 years. It's very few people these days have careers in one profession that long. And what was crazy about it, when I retired, there were some of the people, obviously nobody I knew personally, but some of the stuff through social media is like, I can't believe you quit. Why are you quitting? This and that. I'm like, quitting, man. I'm like, dude, I worked almost 25 years doing this. I'm like, I have a pension. I get a retirement check every month. This is a long time. I miss the guys at work a lot. that I worked with. I missed, chasing bad guys. I missed, like I said, a shooting or a homicide that goes out and we get to go chase those guys down. I don't miss all the other BS that has now come along with being a policeman here in this country. So I'm glad I'm not having to deal with that to that level. But to answer your question, which one I liked most, they were just so different. The television side of stuff in the New York, it was great in the beginning because it was new. Mm-hmm. But then it's work. People think, I had a lot of people kind of giving me a hard time, about me traveling to New York and, being on television. I'm like, man, I'm working Monday through Thursday, got off work at 4:00 on Thursday, caught a 5:30 flight to New York. There's no direct flight from Tulsa to New York. There is now, but there wasn't then. I'd get to my hotel anytime between 11:30 and 1 in the morning, hit the gym Friday morning, had to be over at the studio in the afternoon, didn't get back home till 1:30 in the morning. Same thing Saturday. Then I caught the first flight home Sunday because I had to get back home and cut the yard, go to the grocery store, do laundry, make sure my son was, my son was in high school at the time, as he handling his business. And then I was back to work in the police department Monday at 8. And so it was all work. Very, very fortunate. I know I'm not necessarily answering your question, which one I liked more. They just almost meshed together, even though the two of them were so different.
Yeah, and it's crazy how so many people on the outside view different jobs as like it kind of like, man, that doesn't seem like work. Like, for example, like I'm a loan officer. I work with a lot of realtors. That's one thing that people see and they're like, man, I can't believe you just get a commission check just for getting somebody into a home. Like they don't see anything on the behind the curtains. But I've even, I've gotten a couple of comments on, the last couple of years I've been able to travel quite a bit just for different masterminds, different conferences. And it's kind of back to back to back like that to where you don't even get to enjoy. Like I just got back from San Diego last month, and dude, that was my first time there, and
beautiful place.
Yes, I loved it. But here's the thing: is one of the biggest things that I wanted was I've heard that the Mexican food down there is like amazing, and I was like, I just want like some street tacos, like the best street tacos that I can get there. I didn't even get to do that because I was literally back to back to back, and then as soon as I landed, I was doing that, and then I got done, and I usually take a really early flight. And then even social media, like some of the things I've been working on my personal brand for the last year, and I've been able to meet a lot of people that like are making a living from being like an influencer and stuff. Right. And people just seem like, oh, poor you, like you have to make these posts to make a living. And one of the girls that she's an agent and she's an influencer as well, she showed me like the contracts that she has to sign of like everything she has to do, or else, she gets docked for, the money that they're paying her. And I'm like, this is like a serious job, and people don't ever see it like that.
No. Yeah. And like I said, I mean, I will never complain about doing it. I mean, I'm compensated well for doing the job that I do out there. Excuse me. And, I enjoy it. I love it, but it's a job. It is work. Now, I don't take that job as serious as I did my police job, because the way I look at it is, doing that job, to me, that was work. I loved it, but that was work. The media stuff that I get to do, very fortunate, enjoying it. But if it all ended tomorrow, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. Wouldn't, cry or anything like that over it. But, you're in New York City, and I'm eating breakfast at the hotel. I'm picking up Chipotle for lunch. You're in the city that has the, 5-star, restaurants around the best in the world there. I'm working every Friday and Saturday night, so it's not like I'm going out clubbing and, living New York City life. That was not that at all. It was just work.
That's crazy. So one of the things that you mentioned was that one of the things that you're thankful that you don't miss is pretty much the 180 that people have changed. And I mean, there's always been people's views of like, is the police good or is the police bad? But I mean, it really got bad during the George Floyd thing,
right.
To where I'm curious on, you probably have more insight on this, but I was just talking with a buddy like a couple months ago on when that whole thing happened, they shut all those cop shows down, right? And then even including like little kid show, like the
Paw Patrol.
Yeah. And then so how is that back on, like your show, and is Cops back on air?
Cops is back on air. They're back on air on Patrol Live. That's a show that's on that's live policing is basically what it's showing. There's a few other ones that out there. It was kind of funny. The fictional police shows they kept on, like
the Law and Order and stuff like that.
Exactly. You kept those type of things on, but it was the realistic ones. And what I've always said is, I think there's just a lot of bad information out there or uninformed people. And you being a loan officer, you're operating off of numbers. I mean, am I correct? Yes. I don't know your job, but I'm saying it's got to do with numbers. Yeah. Numbers you can't manipulate. I mean, they are what they are. The cost of the house is what it is. The down payment is what it is. The taxes are going to be what they are. Your commission is what it is. Things like that. That's how. So you look at accountants, you look at engineers because they have to deal with numbers and mathematics and things like that. And the stats, the police stats, it's numbers. And when you look at what the factual numbers are of anything from use of force incidents across the country, citizens' complaints, officer-involved shootings, officers-involved shootings with unarmed people, the number is, and the total number of contacts that police have every year, the number is so tiny, but it just gets blown out on media. And then when you talk about social media, it just passes, information. Someone posts something on social media, especially if it's somebody who has a blue check mark next to their name, someone who's verified, and they put out such and such. So many of their followers just naturally believe it rather than educating themselves. And so that was one of the things that still to this day, I think, goes on with not just law enforcement, but when you get into politics and, all the other type of things. I think people just kind of focus on whether they're left or right, red or blue, whatever you want to call it, and they don't open their eyes and educate themselves and look at both sides.
Yeah, it's whatever gets the clicks, right?
100%. It's all, hey, man, these people, everybody that's on TV, they're getting paychecks.
Yeah, and even you, back when you started as a host back in 2016, we had social media, but it's not like it is right now, to where, like you said, the people with blue check marks, like, a small portion, a big portion of them are not celebrities anymore. You can just go out there and become a social media influencer and influence so many people, whether you're giving them the right information or the wrong information.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty crazy and sad, but I mean, some people are using it for the good as well. So what was it that kind of gave you guys the green light to kind of bring those shows back on?
It basically it took a network that had the cojones to say, hey, we're going to put this on. My personal opinion, when A&E television networks took the show off the air back in 2020, I think they had an opportunity, in my opinion, to take advertising, whether it was billboards, radio, print, what they call cross-advertise. A&E could advertise on other networks as well, and just say, policing, this I'm talking back in, when George Floyd happened in May of 2020, you could say policing is the most talked about topic in the country right now. Tune into the only show that lets you watch it live and judge for yourself. That's it. Because the idea of the show, it isn't to say, yay, the police are the heroes, rah, 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 we like police. It's just, again, to let the public see what's going on. And do people who are fans of police watch it? Absolutely. But I can also tell you, Will, that all the gangsters I dealt with here in North Tulsa when I was on patrol, they watched it. They talked to me about it. When it went off the air, they kept asking when the show was coming back and things like that. Is there an entertainment factor to it? Sure. I think being a policeman, there is some entertaining sides to it. But for the public as a whole, they can watch from the comfort of their home and actually see what's going on, as opposed to somebody on social media or the news that just puts a little 10-second clip of something that happens. You get the whole story on a lot of incidents.
What's interesting about your situation is that you were out there at the same time hosting the show, but then also living a day-to-day cop life here for a period of time. Did you ever see people that, did you guys see an increase of whether it was new criminals or the same criminals that maybe it motivated them to do more bad things to maybe get on the show and stuff like that?
No, we never had that. In fact, it kind of became almost a joke that when the cameras were rolling with us, we were very busy, but there all of a sudden, as we were on 2 to 3 months, some nights were really slow. And we think everybody was at home watching the show. And that's one of the things we see with like On Patrol Live is whether we're in Daytona Beach, Florida, or, Terre Haute, Indiana, wherever we may be, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, we're at now, the locals, because they know their police department's on, they're watching the show and they know the neighborhoods they see, or they know the restaurants that the cops drive by. They like to stay home and watch it a lot. And so you kind of, so that started to happen with us is like, our gangsters, they themselves were staying home and watching it and then going back out after midnight. But it was a great, just for the public as a whole. I don't know if I would use the word PR, but it was so many people would come up and talk to like the guys that I worked with and stuff like that. Like, hey man, we love watching you guys, keep it up. Hey, can we take a picture with you? That type of stuff. And the way I looked at it, it was like, man, we're police officers. That's a good contact with someone in the public. And even the gangster world we were dealing with, we'd stop them on a car stop. They would want to talk about the show, and so it wasn't this animosity between us and a suspect. It was a friendly conversation about something. It's also a great recruiting tool for police departments. The profession is having a really hard time right now filling police academies across the country. And, if your agency's on there, if there is somebody who in fact is interested in going to law enforcement, they go, man, I like the way these guys do things here in Daytona Beach or, Nye County, Nevada, wherever it is. And then it helps them out recruiting wise as well.
Wow. I didn't even think about that, but that's really interesting. Maybe also for promotion later down, if people are willing to move, probably, would you say so?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are guys that are still police officers, that I know are Tulsa police officers now that when they were rookies, they told me they came here from out of state after seeing our department on that show. And that's awesome. That's why they decided to come here.
So what is it that made you wanted to get into the unit that you were in? Just because another show that was like, for example, like you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in a different, completely different unit than like, let's say Chris Butterfield is, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And then you also have like the show that I used to watch all the time, which was First 48, which is like the murder homicide. Yeah. So like, what made you say like the gang unit? Like that's kind of what I think it's going to fulfill me.
Yeah. So, the First 48, they pretty much, 100% focused on our homicide unit here in Tulsa, which for the public that doesn't know this, yes, they see us on that show. Our homicide unit is fantastic. I think we have like literally like an average of like 95% solve rate or something like that here in Tulsa. Yeah. I think I just recently saw something that like the nationwide average homicide solve rate's like 43%.
Wow.
Across the country. So that tells you, it's crazy how good our agency is and we have a decent amount of homicides. I mean, we're having 60, 70, 80 or whatever the number is a year. It's not like we have two. So I grew up in Northern California. I grew up in the Bay Area, lived in the city of San Francisco for elementary and middle school, moved out to a suburb of San Francisco for my high school. And just to date myself, I graduated high school in 1992. So the late 80s, early 90s is when criminal street gangs basically erupted, gangster rap, all that type of stuff, crack cocaine. That's when it all blew up, was that time period. I didn't go to like some little preppy private school. I grew up, in the city. And so I had been around all that type of stuff my whole life, essentially. And guys that I grew up around with, it's the typical story you hear, guys I grew up with. I've had guys that have been killed. I've had guys that have gone to prison, and stuff like that. But I was friends with all these guys. We all hung out real tight. I just never got in trouble. I was always the smarter of the guys that went like, I'm not doing that, man. That's not smart. So I knew I couldn't stay in California because I was worried about getting in trouble. My parents had divorced. My dad moved to San Diego. My mom had family out here in the Tulsa area. And my mom had already moved here a year before, and I stayed for a year by myself up there in the Bay Area. And I knew I wanted to be a cop, and I couldn't do it staying out there if I stayed around where I was at. So I came out here to Oklahoma. I was just going to go to school, get a degree, and go back to the West Coast and be a cop. Ended up doing my internship with Tulsa Police Department, got hired here right when I finished school. And from the time I got on, I knew I was like, I want to go on the SWAT team when I can, and I want to be in the gang unit. And that was just my two goals. Was fortunate, was able to accomplish both of them. And I think it was just part of where I grew up at and how the time period I grew up and all that I understood. I just understand the streets. I mean, it just sounds corny saying it, but I understand the streets. And, I understood how to talk to the, gangsters and stuff like that. And so it was just my natural thing. I love chasing violent offenders. I'm not into stopping good people going to work every day because they're driving 10 miles over the speed limit. That's just not me, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not concerned with working traffic accidents. I'm glad there are policemen that do like doing that. That's just not my forte.
So what is one of the experiences that you're willing to share that you think that was it was pretty dramatic as far as like maybe kept you from sleeping? So I'm sure you've seen so many things in like almost 25 years.
Sure.
That I mean, I'm just, what's like one of the craziest things that you've seen out there?
Man, you know, and you're not the first person that's asked that type of question. And one of the things I'll say is in policing, or what I've learned, I guess, just about human natures, people react to different things differently. And, you know, you hear everything from, you know, the fight or flight situation that happens when something crazy has happened. Do people freeze up like, oh my gosh, and just lock up? Do people run? Do people stand there and try to fight off somebody? And it's the same type of thing even with police officers. You go through the academy, sure, we're doing all the physical things. You're learning how to drive a car fast. You're learning how to shoot. You're learning, you know, case law. But a big part of what you do, and we actually still to this day, and even back then, we have psych services that are there off and on. Like, it's literally part of the training throughout about how to deal with stress. How do you deal with a traumatic situation? You know, because if you and I are partners at work and we get in a shooting and all of a sudden I see you get shot and go down, you know, I've still got to be able to do my job, you know, put the suspect down himself, put out a description, go to start treating you rather than just freak out. So, I mean, I've been in 2 shootings myself on the police department. I've been present on several others where we've shot and killed people. And I've seen a lot of people shot, a lot of people dead, you know, working, you know, showing up on homicides and stuff like that. And I've never been bothered by any of it. One of the things that I never did like was seeing somebody like in a really bad car accident that was still alive. And as weird as it sounds, it's like you see someone who's died in a car accident, but if someone's still alive and they're stuck in the car and, you know, they've got a compound fracture or something, it's like I'm sympathetic to the pain that person's feeling. So that part's I didn't like. But the worst thing that I ever saw that, you know, I say bothered me, my son, I think, was around 2 years old at the time, and there was a kid that had been beaten, and they thought he was going to die. He was at the hospital. And at the time, I was working in a unit called our Major Crimes Homicide Unit. And so what we do in that unit is we respond to every unnatural death: homicide, suicide, fatality, car accidents, children, you know, drowning in a bathtub, someone drowning in a pool, whatever it may be. When we went to a small plane crash, you know, things like semi-truck that went off an overpass, you name it. You go to those. And there was a kid that had been beaten really, really bad. He was at the hospital, and they thought he was going to die. So I had to go to the hospital and take photos of this kid, and he was the same age as my son at the time. And the father had beaten this kid. He actually ended up surviving, but just seeing this little kid that was beaten that bad and then go home that night and see my son the same age, you know, and it's just like, man, how does somebody do this to a kid? How does a parent do this to her kid? And so that's kind of the one thing that's, you know, just, I was like, man, and are we allowed to cuss on here?
Yeah.
I was like, that's the one thing. I was like, man, this world is fucked up.
Yeah.
You know, when I saw that one. But like I said, all the other stuff that happened, it's so crazy. You know, you're just, part of your mind just kind of shuts it off, and that's the only way I can explain it. Yeah. Nothing has really ever bothered me.
That's crazy. Yeah. I mean, just in that answer, you just kind of took me into like a lot of the things that you've seen. And it's just, I mean, it takes a tough mind to be able to cope with it all. You
know, and what they try to, you know, tell you, like, and just going back to even like Butters, you know, that's what we call him, Butter. You know, the guy's got a phenomenal wife. He's got athletic kids. He does CrossFit. His wife does CrossFit. You've got to have these hobbies, life outside of that job.
Which is what I was about to ask you, because
you have to.
One of the things that people always, like, even right now, dude, like I went to the gym this morning. Mm-hmm. I was doing a clean and jerk with one leg, just because I feel that my job is so stressful at times that I have to take my mind somewhere else. And even the biggest difference that I love about CrossFit is that it's not like a global gym that you're able to kind of have your phone out. Like you're doing the workout and your mind is taken. It has to be taken from everything else. So you do CrossFit, but what are some of the things that you do to be able to get the stress off?
Well, and kind of answering that and going back to what I was saying, part of my position on the police department, I'd have to go instruct at the academy for recruits that are going through. I'd teach the block for criminal street gangs. And I would tell them all the time, like, guys, this job is not your identity. You know, you can't walk around 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I'm a policeman robot thing. You just can't. You've got to let it go. You've got to have friends outside of this job. I love all my cop buddies that I'm still friends with, but for me personally, and this isn't, you know, your podcast isn't a promotion for CrossFit, but one of the things I loved about it was I met you there, a loan officer. You know, I've met engineers, I've met landmen that work in, you know, the natural gas, just all these different careers and jobs that if I was only hanging around with my cop buddies, I would never met in my life. And my closest friends to this day, you know, Aaron Shupp, who owns CrossFit Eclipse, buddy of mine named Jason Sales, who owns a hail dent repair business, you know, and it's just all the different people I've met outside of policing, because you can't just sit and talk cop stories, relive everything that goes on. So to answer your question, going to the gym is a big part of it for me. I love the social aspect of the people that are there to talk to them, obviously getting the workout in, clearing my mind. I've taken up golf just 2 years ago. I've got the golf bug big time. I'm an avid bourbon collector.
I saw that.
So that's a big hobby of mine right now.
What's your favorite bourbon? Man,
you know, right now I'm fortunate. I've probably got, I'm approaching around 400 bottles in my collection at the house right now. Like an everyday drinker, there's a Weller Foolproof is one of my favorite, but there's a company called Nashville Barrel Company out of Nashville, Tennessee, and they just put out this honey cask one that was done in this honey. And it is amazing. I mean, it is just absolutely amazing.
I'm curious to ask you, do you have one of the, what is that called? The super expensive. Is it Pappy Van Winkle.
Do
you have one of those?
I do. I've got.
Do you really tell like difference in that? Because I watched a show of like why the price of that just skyrocketed. So I'm just curious, like you're like a very like connoisseur, like do you tell a difference?
You know, and there's everybody's got a different palate, and that's the thing is, you know, whether it's myself or you drinking or I could like one thing that you don't, and that's the beauty of it. There are some that I think that are really bad that we both go, yeah, this is terrible. Excuse me, but it is the Pappy. There's good, so there's a bunch in the Pappy family. The only one I don't have is what they call the Pappy 23. That's a 23 year, but that is going for, you know, on the secondary market, it's about $4,000 a bottle, and you know the retail on it I think is $200. But it's $200, and then right away you could walk out the door and sell it for $4,000 online. And I'm just not going to pay $4,000 for a bottle that's going to sit on my shelf or anything like that. But I mean, there's a bunch of great bottles that are in that $60, $70 range that anybody could walk into any store and pick up. They're the hard to get ones. They call them allocated. There's only there's only this small amount of these bottles, and that's why they're worth so much.
One that kind of, and I know you might be able to tell me, like, so there's bourbon and whiskey is pretty much the same thing, right?
Yeah, so all bourbons are whiskeys, not all whiskeys are bourbon is how it works. Bourbon basically has to be done, I mean, it's like these little rules, it has to be done in the state of Kentucky. It's got to be done in brand new oak barrels, has to be aged for a certain time. The alcohol content has to be a certain level, can't be any added coloring or anything like that. It's basically what makes it a bourbon. One
of those that I was surprised that it wasn't as expensive, but it you might know more about it, that just kind of blew off the shelves, is that Buffalo Trace one.
Yeah.
It's like $40, right?
Yeah, that's like cheap, man. Even that's gone up. It used to be like $22. So, so Buffalo Trace is one of the historic distilleries out of Kentucky, and they actually put out a lot of different products. They have a Buffalo Trace bottle they do themselves, and then they've got like the Weller, there's called the Weller lineup. They've got a Weller single barrel, Weller foolproof, called CYPB. They've got all these different ones, and they all come from that distillery, the Buffalo Trace distillery. And Buffalo Trace, they've got some very, very high-end bottles that go for several $1,000s as well.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. Well, man, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, man.
I appreciate you. And so I always like to end the show asking this one question, but for you, I actually have two. I'm just curious. So the one question I always ask is, what do you think the best advice that you've ever received? But the other question, curveball, that I have for you is, if you could go back, 23-year-old Sean, for some reason you couldn't get into the academy, and of course at that point you weren't able to be a host of Live PD, like what would you've done? I'm just curious.
Man, we'll hit that last question first. Man, I probably would have tried to go into sports medicine. My father was in the military for 32 years, and he was a corpsman, so he was in the medical field in the Navy. And so kind of growing up around that. But I've loved sports, been athletic, playing ball since I was a kid. I was never good enough to play beyond high school in any sport, but I loved it. I understand it, stuff like that. So that would have been a way that, one, I could have probably made a good living, but just being around sports still, like being a team doctor or a team therapist, something like that. I would have loved to have done that. Still been around that lifestyle, contributing to it. As far as advice, man, this is something I tell my kids. I'll give you two, first of all. I told my kids this. I don't know where I heard it or anything like that, but in life, legitimate, you have very few friends. You have a lot of acquaintances. So that's something people need to keep in mind. So when somebody you call, quote unquote, a friend, and then they talk smack behind your back or whatever they do, those aren't friends. That's an acquaintance. There's work acquaintances, acquaintances you have, but there's, usually a handful of people that are true friends. There's a lot of people that claim you're a friend. They don't know who your kids are. That's an acquaintance. The other thing I try to give to people is my daughter, she's almost 26. My boy's about to be 21. Their mom lives out of state. I'm very, very close with my kids. See each other pretty much every single day, even at the ages they are. But I try to tell fathers that have daughters, you have got to tell your daughter from the time they are 5, 6 years old, young, especially when they get into that early teen time, 11, 12, 13, 14, that you love them, that they're absolutely beautiful, that type of thing. Because if you as a dad don't do that, that's the age that 11, 12, 13, other boys, older boys start telling them, hey, you're beautiful. I love you. I love you. And if that's the first time they're hearing it, that's how these girls get themselves in trouble. They haven't heard that from another man before. And so when they start hearing it from somebody else at that age, that's why we end up with a lot of girls getting pregnant and doing stupid stuff, because they get enamored with it and blown away. So that's a fact. I believe it.
Man, those are two good ones, man. I appreciate it. I think this is the first time. Normally, I throw the question, and then because people are always like, "What are we going to talk about?" And I kind of, like I told you, I'm like, I just want to have a conversation,
Sure.
And then they're like, "Oh, but you were able to come with two of them, pretty good."
That's why I'm on TV, Will.
I love that. Well, man, last thing is, where can people find you? I'm sure they can just search your name.
It's man, I'm out there. I'm not very. I think the last time I posted on Instagram was like in November or something like that. So
last year.
Yeah, man.
That's crazy.
So I'm not on there very much, but it's Sean SEAN _ Larkin LARKIN. You just punch in Sean Larkin, it'll pop up. Same thing on Twitter as well as Instagram. And as I said, I'm not on Facebook, man. So
there we go, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you.
Hey, my pleasure.
Oh man, the time kind of flew on that one.
Yeah, man. Sorry if I rambled.